Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome to today's session. My name is Farhan, and I am the session moderator for today. Today's topic is forensic engineering. I would like to introduce today's presenter. Many of you already know our trainer for the day, Mr. Sohail Kibriya, who is a former vice president and is currently working as advisor GT&G division. For those of you who do not know him, let me just give you a brief introduction. Mr. Sohail Kibriya has been serving NESPA for the last 38 years. He has also been a lecturer at respected institutes like UET, Lahore, LUMS, Pakistan Institute of Management, FAST, and NUST. Uh, Mr. Sohail Kibriya is also an honored author of more than 60 publications. He is also the founder and head of the research and development cell at NESPA. And I believe he is an enabler who is driven by his passion to train, teach, and help professionals in reaching their maximum potential. Before we start, I would like to inform the participants that a recorded version of this webinar will be available to you, and we will try for this to be an interactive session. In case of any queries or questions, the participant can use the Zoom chat or the raise hand option in Zoom. I won't take more of your time, sir. Over to you, sir. Please, you may start the session.
Thank you very much, and assalamu alaikum to all the participants who are here to listen to me on this different topic. It is slightly out of box in Pakistan, at least, forensic engineering, because there has been little talk on this in the textbooks as well as in general. But now engineers are faced with, you see, many matters in engineering in their routine work in which the legal implications are there and which they have to investigate failure. So first of all, what this forensic engineering is. Forensic engineering is the application of science and technology and its principles to investigate the failures or the suspected failures which could take place in any discipline of engineering. And quite often it is lumped with the presentation of the conclusions which are obtained to the court of law. So there has to be certain protocol, certain language for that, how to go about. Uh, yeah, just a minute. Main contents here you can see. I'll give a general introduction and then I'll let you know the main domain of forensic engineering, that where it is applicable. And as engineers, you are all engineers, what we have to do and how to do in case there is an involvement of this kind of technology in which we have to investigate failure or a suspected failure, and we have to keep our language kind of legal language in which we have to have interface with our legal profession. So I'll give you some tips too on different matters, and also you see something on reduction of claims, because you see claims are the matters of dispute which also take the cases to the court of law or to arbitration if some thing could be done to reduce the number of claims, and some particular issues relating to geotechnical engineering with regard to forensic engineering matters. Now you see in this figure, you see different kind of works or structure. They could be civil, mechanical, or any other engineering. Could be a material, a machine, or a component, you see, of any type. The forensic engineering is the activity to find out that what went wrong and how did it go wrong. Sometimes what to do to make it correct is also included in the scope of forensic engineering in some cases, but generally it is an investigative process, the reverse process. Here you see collapse of a structure. So study of the damaged structures or damaged works, but the study will involve many engineering principles like even sophisticated modeling or some analysis or calculations. They will be a part of this. It's not only the engineering analysis which will be done to investigate failure, the inspection of site, the conditions of inspection of site, and the collection of evidences at the site, in addition to the analysis which will be done in the end, maybe some investigative studies, some laboratory testing would be needed, and ultimately the results are compiled in the form of a report called evaluation report, which may be submitted to the court of law. So in terms of its etymology, we look here that as per dictionary, the use of science and technology in the investigation and establishment of facts or evidences in a code of law. These are the clear-cut meanings of the word forensic. It is derived from a Latin term forensis, meaning public, belonging to the courts of law, and pertaining to or fitted for legal or public argumentation, which is no more private than. So forensic engineering is science concerned with the relations, you see, which are there between engineering and law, how to interface between the two. As per Johann F. Swalter, what does it say? That in forensic engineering, sometimes we have to think and listen like a lawyer, and at other times think and talk like an engineer. So you see, it clearly tells that there has to be a blend in the terminology of engineering of the legal language, which is very important because in legal language, even full stops, commas, the salutation matters. What to talk of the words and sentences. Now let's have a look at this quote by Thomas Edison. He said that I have not failed in case of failure. I have not failed. His version was, I've just found 10,000 more ways that won't work. So this is a perception of what failure was in Thomas Edison's mind. So in your perception too, I want to inculcate this concept that failure, you see, is something which is abnormal, which has not worked according to the normal way or normal procedure. In forensic engineering, we see that we apply the various investigative procedures and processes and try to find out that what is the cause of failure or cause of reduction in the performance for which the structure was basically designed, that it has failed to meet its objective. And it may involve kind of evidences and findings of this investigation before a court of law by the engineer, maybe with the hired lawyer. You see, so the engineer who can do this, who interfaces between the ordinary engineer, the lawyer is the forensic engineer. Here you see the investigation of materials, products, structures, component, machinery, all types of failures, you see, which are not performing their purpose. Either they have failed in totality or there is something you see that their intended purpose is not being fulfilled. They will fall in the domain of forensic engineering. Even the suspected cases in which some doubt is there that the performance may be affected, there could be something flawful in the design or in the construction. So if some forensic study has to be carried out, sometimes referred to as forensic audit, that will also be a part of forensic engineering. So having said that, now let's have the broad definition of forensic engineering, that we are dealing with damaged or deteriorated works. It is different from design, in which we start, you see, designing and planning and then ultimately end up in a design. Here, a structure which has been designed and constructed, and it's the reverse way, you see, in which we have to go to site to make inspection, to make observations, to maybe make some measurements, to collect evidences, to talk to people who have seen it happening, and then probably carrying out some engineering testing, maybe some field testing, maybe some laboratory testing as per requirement, to find out ultimately the reasons for the damage or deterioration, how it happened, why it happened, whatever has happened. So it is like you see, like a detector, you see. In many cases, the forensic engineer is hired also as an expert witness by many organizations, by many clients, so that they can, in their technical language, present the matter in the court of law. Here, I would like to explain a few terms, you see, which are required for clarity in this area of work. One is the accident. So it is a hazard that exists, but the person or people are not aware that it is there. So that all of a sudden may happen, so that becomes an accident about which there is no awareness, but there is an, you see, a danger, a hidden danger is present, about which the people have closed their eyes probably. Whereas on the other hand, the failure is an explicit indication of, you see, whatever wrong has happened. And this is sometimes called an unacceptable difference between what we designed and what we observed, between what was expected and what actually the performance is. And the term risk is taken to mean the probability of the occurrence of such failures or hazards. Safety is the summation, the uh, overall summation of the acceptable risks which we can accept. So we call that safety. So this is how it is taken. I think whatever I'm telling will induce some passion in you to go for some supplementary reading, because some terms will be new for you, some terms will be common, but will be presented to you in a way that you will need to brush up your concepts once again. Uh, is this going to provide solution to failure? Failures are complex. They are said to be complex. And people think sometimes, even engineers would think, some clear and simple and obvious answers, a small, brief answer. But quite often the experience tells that it may be incomplete or incorrect, simply because the failures are complex. It may not be just one small reason. It is just, you see, oversimplification of the reality. So similarly, H.L. Mencken has said that to reach too quickly to the correct solution, there is always an easy solution to every human problem, which looks neat, which looks understandable and plausible, but which is wrong. So this is, you see, what is the caution given on this slide is that the failures are complex. Don't try to think that they can be oversimplified. They need rigorous investigation and study. And what we think correct very quickly in terms of time, spending little effort, will be wrong. Probably that will be wrong. So quick decisions cannot be made in case of investigation of such failures. That is the basic lesson. So from this concept has emerged a new concept of failure literacy, the knowledge of failure, that what could go wrong is necessary, that how to know that how structures, the facilities and the system they fail. If we know that how they fail is taught by experience, then we can figure out that what can go wrong. And this kind of understanding is the literacy about failure. The forensic engineer in general is basically a qualified engineer. It is a discipline of engineering in civil, electrical, mechanical, petroleum or gas or any other discipline of engineering with a lot of experience of having dealt with the matters of failure and having dealt uh, with the matters of failures taken to the jury, to the legal profession. Now, let's have a look at different perceptions of the engineering design versus failure. Engineering design is is an attempt to prevent failure of the system which is designed. Of course, we design to make it failure proof. We don't want that it should fail. So most of the time, this attempt is successful. The systems don't fail. But at other times, it is not successful. It could be a human mistake, it may be a mistake of the system, or sometimes it may be a cause of nature which has to be proven because our engineering designs are also sometimes based on the principles of probability and statistics. And if certain threshold values which are fixed, like for earthquake or for flood, in terms of return period, etc., if they are exceeded, then the design may be regarded as correct as per code, but it has to be proven. But there are elements of nature which make it fail. So lessons have to be learned, you see, from such cases of failure, whether human mistakes or mistakes of the system, or some, you see, some natural experiments in a big way, so that there could be changes in the design procedures and in the codes of engineering. So this is how things keep advancing. In this context, American Society of Civil Engineers (ASCE) has already constituted a technical committee on forensic engineering called TCFE. You can have a look at this. You can Google and you can look at further details that what is the agenda and what is it is doing at the moment. Because failure, detection of failures is a very important discipline in engineering. I know that in many advanced countries of the world, there are national centers to investigate the failures, and some are very renowned in investigating civil engineering failures just from the technical point of view, not for presentation to a court of law, just for the enhancement of knowledge, for transferring knowledge to the students, to professors, to the practicing engineers. So similarly, American Society for Testing and Materials, American Standards for Testing and Materials, ASTM, has also constituted a committee on forensic engineering called Committee E58. This can also be seen and checked, you see. I understand that ASTM E58 committee has some subcommittees too, chartered with different agendas. So that looks very interesting that how works are being carried out on the matters of failure in engineering. What is the main role of a forensic engineer? Sometimes it is broken into two parts, the detective part and the engineering part. In the detective part, the forensic engineer, with the help of the legal profession, looks for clues, evidences, testimonies, and you see, based on inspections and you see, talking to people, interviewing them to achieve certainty about what exactly has happened. This is one thing, and this is mostly qualitative. Then he goes into engineering role to go into quantitative evaluation of what has happened in terms of his use of his gadgets and engineering principles, like some tests at site, some tests in the laboratory on material, some computer modeling, and then arriving at certain solutions, and that they are dovetailed where with the findings of his role as a detective, you see, both are combined to make a final evaluation, which are submitted in the form of a report to the court of law or to a jury. But what is this presenting a testimony to a jury? Attorneys are the lawyers, you see, legal profession, the states that in giving testimony to a jury, keep it simple, just simple. Just give that much which is required. Don't give too much, use simple language. And put figures and photos in your findings and reports. They create much better impression than long write-ups, you see, for understanding of the others so that they get convinced and you win the argument. One thing is to be kept in mind that we have engineers with high IQ, brilliant engineers, but they may not be very good forensic experts because I told you that it is a blend of engineering and legal profession. The role of a detective, the brilliant engineers may not be that good in that sometimes. So a pleasant engineer who is a good communicator with good interpersonal skills and good engineer too, he is in fact going to be a good or successful forensic engineer. Here, very interestingly, I would like to share one of the earliest recorded legal codes dealing with the kinds of failure in construction was that of Hammurabi, the great Babylonian king of 17th, 18th century before Christ. It is quoted by Fitzsimons in 1986. His legal code was very funny and you see it was quite simple. Just look at it. The code was, if a contractor builds a house and it collapses, killing its owner, then the contractor will be killed. And if the son of the owner is killed, then so will be the son of the contractor. So you see, it was a very harsh code. 18th century before Christ, you see, but people understood, you see, at that point of time. So very interesting to quote here, Napoleonic Code of 1804, beginning of 19th century. If a structure had a loss of serviceability within 10 years of its completion due to poor workmanship, of course it has to be proven in the court of law or foundation failure, then the builder will be sent to prison. Simply, the builder will be put behind the bars. Today, the things are different. We have FIDIC, we have codes of Pakistan Engineering Council to put penalty on the consultant, on the contractor, you see, uh, on the design work, on the construction work separately. Now, let's talk of our situation in NESPAC engineers. We have seen that there is a sudden rise, you see, in the past few years of presenting our projects in one way or the other to different legal forums, which include Public Accounts Committee, different courts uh, called by Anti-Corruption Establishment, ACE. There are calls from NAB, National Accountability Bureau, from Federal Investigation Agency, and some other legal forums. So this means that our engineers who are just engineers in technical terms, who are not trained at all in legal terms, don't understand any legal terminology or language, they have to develop some understanding of the forensic matters, of the legal matters, of the interplay of engineering and legal terms, so that when they're there, you see, they have some understanding, and the inhibition is reduced to a great degree. So some matters related to forensic engineering must be learned by us here in NESPAC too, because many of us have to attend these forums under compulsion. Although we do not play as forensic engineer for most of the time, NESPAC is generally not hired as a forensic engineering organization. We don't normally serve, you see, except a few cases, as forensic engineer in our consultancy business. Sometimes we do, but that is, you see, very little often. Now, as a result of this, what are the requirements? We need to develop good understanding and awareness of so many things. Well, NESPAC, and if there are engineers from other forums, you see, listening to me, good for them too. That basic awareness should be enhanced about various legal forums. And there is no dearth of material. If you Google even, you see, if you don't have access to books and legal documents, you can Google and find your answers, preliminary answers to so many queries. So, basic understanding of legal forum, what to do where, what do they do and what we have to do in a certain situation and where. What are the expectations of such forums? When our engineers are presented there, when our engineers present their cases there, their projects, what do these forums expect from them, from our engineers? What is the appropriate written and oral communication which is needed by them? what kind of our body gesture, demeanor, and body language should be displayed there when we go at these forums. These forums, they require from us certain material, certain information, and quite often these agencies would be more interested in place of our rigorous engineering into these matters, some affirmation on the soundness of design, uh, uh, to see whether our construction is as per the design or not, whether there is a disparity between the two, how transparently the contract was awarded. We are a public body, so this becomes important that the procedure for awarding contract, different contracts have to be transparent. So we need to have a complete documentation ready for that purpose. And we do the things in an appropriate manner always, yeah, as per PEPRA. So there is no reason to develop any tensions on account of that. So work measurements. Then when the works are measured at sites for payment, whether they were measured appropriately, some proof of that, record of that, and if the payments were released on the basis of IPCs for the work completed or even for works which were not completed. So these are the main areas in which you see our engineers are required to give some testimonies, to produce some evidences in the court of law in general. Standard job of a forensic engineer. Well, forensic engineer will investigate the damage, the deterioration, or even collapse, or doubtful situation, that if there is doubt about the loss of strength of a system, then he will determine also the reasons, the causes, that what happened, whether was there was a design deficiency, there was a material issue, or whether uh, there has been some unscrupulous construction practice. So, in some cases, the forensic engineer is also given the task of preparing some recommendations for the repair of the systems. The forensic engineer may also have to determine who is responsible for the damaged or deteriorated structures. This is also a duty sometimes assigned to the forensic engineer in order to find out technically that what happened. Ultimately, the forensic engineer may have to testify, to take these arguments, his findings, under oath in a court of law as to the correct findings as per his knowledge, expertise, and the rigorous work done. So that becomes an important part in the part of forensic engineer. But it all depends, you see, what are the TOR of the assignment given to the forensic engineer. What qualifications needed for such an engineer? So there are guidelines of American Society of Civil Engineers for failure investigation. So that says that a forensic engineer must be an expert in his or her field. So there is no second opinion. An engineer has to be expert in his technical field and should also have a thorough knowledge of the subject under investigation. I understand that at bachelor's level, forensic engineering, even as a topic, is not covered at the moment. So this requires some modification of the curricula. Some introduction should be given about this. So I've been bringing this point in the ongoing process of academia, industry relationship, and between and in the meetings of industrial accreditation boards of different universities. I've been telling them that some curricula and readjustment is needed to give some introduction to the engineers, and even at bachelor's level, to the legal aspects, to the contractual aspects. I think their studies are silent at bachelor level generally about these aspects. Secondly, the expert knowledge may have been acquired by advanced education and by years of practice. So this means experience. Practice makes an engineer perfect. Additionally, a forensic engineer must arrive at the final conclusions of his findings on the basis of sound and state-of-the-art engineering practices and the fundamental which cannot be challenged, which are the correct ways of working and the evidences which have been actually collected and developed during the studies at site, and the evidences collected from different agencies or people. So this is, as per ASCE guidelines, the requirements, main requirement for a forensic engineer. So look at this another angle. The investigation of materials, products, or structures that fail or do not operate or function as intended. So that is what forensic engineer will do. So generally, it is much common in civil cases to go in civil cases than to go in the criminal cases. So such issues will be dealt with generally in civil cases. Purpose of a forensic engineering investigation is to find out the causes of failure or distress with a view to improve the performance or life of a component. So whatever happened has happened. Now the further improvement or its livability, its performance has to be improved so that the facility can be used with low risk, with high confidence. Where they are used, forensic engineers, in which circumstances. So most engineering disasters, any type of disaster which takes place, any type of collapse that takes place, or design anomalies are there, so they are subject to forensic investigation by engineers. Then, if there are cases like train derailments, like aircraft crashes, some automobile accidents, which challenge their basic design and history, which have involvement of design of the automobile. So they are also investigated by forensic engineers. Uh, Many types of consumer products and medical devices and structures and materials and tools and machinery you see used by different professions. If it malfunctions resulting in loss or damage, so that will also be subject to its forensic engineering. Such kind of forensic engineering sometimes is also called forensic audit of engineering products and systems. So, in addition, insurance companies use forensic engineers to prove liability or non-liability. So, the role of forensic engineer becomes important. So, he is a really experienced engineer who has not only gained expertise in design but also gained expertise in the failure of the system. He has seen and evaluated the failed systems. That is what becomes a good forensic engineer. Uh, any questions till now? No question. So let's have a small discussion on the types of damages which we see in our systems in engineering. One are the visible damages which we can see with the naked eye. So visible damages could be of three types: the architectural, which are of little importance, less significance in the form of minor cracks in floors and finishes. Then there are some functional damages, which impair the function of some of the facilities of a structure. You see, like jamming of windows, and you see big plaster crackings falling off. You see sagging of floor. So some functional impairment, but the structural integrity is not hurt. So a third type of visible damage category is the most acute category, is that of the structural damage, in which some part of the structure actually has collapsed or has developed very serious cracking or tilting or distortions or movements of beams, columns, etc., so that it could be very dangerous from the structural strength and stability point of view. So there are three visible damages you see which a forensic engineer will come across, and then there could be some hidden damages, hidden effects, hidden or latent damages related to the hidden weakness. You see, something has taken place like Uh, the reinforcement steel may get rusted, but it may not be visible to the naked eye, or there could be some alkali silica reaction within concrete, so that may not be very much apparent in the beginning. So these kind of effects which pertain to the weakness, they are the hidden weakness uh, kind of damages. Or it could be that a facility is designed for certain level of load and the design was appropriate or inappropriate. uh, Somehow less number of reinforcement steel and less thickness of the concrete member has been used. So there is some hidden weakness present in the system even in that case. It can be discovered by reviewing the design, by rerunning the calculation check, by using some testing method, etc., etc. So a third kind of damage is also recognized in this area of forensic matters, that is related to the monetary losses, damage of or loss of money, or you see, like that, ancillary damage, financial losses. In this slide, you see a view of architectural damage. You see, damage is there, but we regard it, you see, less important. Here you see functional damage, you see, could be jamming of the windows floor, some spoiling of the plaster from the roof, and some plaster here you see, in the right part you see cracking the plaster of the wall. So the integrity of the building is still uh, there and it's not hurt. Here you can see serious damages to the columns, to the RC wall system. Here you see uh, excessive differential settlement, you see, resulting into this kind of cracking. Apparently, this part of building, you see, has settled, you see. You can see from the top that there's a kind of sagging pattern. So, uh, forensic engineer, while looking at the structures, has to be very vigilant, very particular about the type of the cracks, their shape, their orientation, their location. That makes a very, very interesting study, and those cracks have to be mapped back, you see, properly. They have to be picked up. Typical clients who would hire engineers to perform forensic investigations are, which are those insurance companies, as I said earlier, who would be independent claim adjusters who adjust the claims, and their intern will be hired by insurance companies, and the claim adjuster then may hire the forensic engineers, or sometimes directly the property owners. They may hire such engineers who have the ability to investigate failures, or the parties which were involved in a lawsuit in the court of law, the developers who develop projects, building projects, or area development work carry out. So they do, and some government departments too. So you see, this is how generally the client is for the forensic engineers. Let's have a small discussion on the legal process. I will first give you a brief highlight of the civil litigation. Let's start with the filing of a lawsuit. The one who files a suit is called a plaintiff or a complainant, the one who has made a complaint, right? The person against whom a complaint is made, he has to defend, so he is the defendant, or who has to respond or reply, so he is the respondent. So they are the two opposite groups, the plaintiff versus defendant, or complainant versus respondent. So this is the, I mean, legal terminology, and I think some of you would be aware, and those who are not aware will be gaining something out of this talk today. So when the litigation starts, other parties who are involved with the project may be sued by the defendant. They are called cross defendants. So I've given an example here that if I'm a homeowner, I'm a plaintiff. So uh, I may sue a developer or a contractor for doing some bug in my structure. So if there's a foundation damage, I will sue him. So he may in turn sue another agency to which he gave subcontract, maybe a soil investigation engineer, geotechnical engineer. So that geotechnical engineer will be called cross defendant here. So there could be some other subcontracts also, and there may be a number of cross defendants you see in a legal suit. Whereas the main suit is between the plaintiff and the defendant. Miller in 1993 gave a very interesting figure that about 95%, as much as 95% of all the construction defect cases, they settle before the date of the trial. So this is very good. That most of the people, they try to avoid the long, lengthy procedures of the court, and somehow, even if the case is gone to the court, they will try to settle it out of court. And this happened in a big majority, 95%. Very encouraging. Now, let's have a look at some legal terms like attorney-client privilege. So it protects all documents concerning communication, including emails, text messages, letters, etc., made by the client or issued to the client. So that's a privilege that they may not be, given to the other party. And similarly, attorney work product is the written or oral material which is prepared by the attorney, by the lawyer, or for the lawyer. So there is a privilege for that too, that it may not be made public or will not be given to the other party. Statute of limitation. So statute of limitation is a law that would set the maximum time that the two parties in conflict have to initiate the legal proceedings from the date of the alleged offense. So that sets the time. That after occurrence of that, you have to settle it within this much. You have to do it within this much time. Standard of care in negligence is another term. The level of care that a reasonable skilled person will exercise. So that is made as a standard. And if it is not done accordingly, then it is regarded as negligence. Strict liability is a maximum liability. If there is a damage, the injurer has to bear the total amount of damages. So that is strict liability. In comparison to, you see, less strict liability. In case of negligence, the liability could be less strict, you see, if it is proven. So a certificate of merit, you see, of course, as the name implies, you see, it may be issued that everything has been done properly, and there is a declaration. A document, any document, legal document, which displays some announcement or proclamation. It makes some proclamation. So that is declaration. Case management order. The case management order, interestingly, is code. There is a code issued pro forma case management order, so which should be sent uh, to the court in draft form before the actual date of hearing. So that is what they call course management order. I'm not telling you too much of legal terminology, but I think it's good once in a while the engineer should know, at least while talking of the forensic engineering, that these are the wordings which are used. And I think many of you will like to consult back some legal documents or maybe Google to find out the real meanings. So a term is called discovery in legal process, a process of obtaining information that is relevant to the lawsuit currently, which is sub judice or in the court of law. So there could be some methods or procedures of discovery, like to reveal the information, like interviewing the people, the witnesses, researching the documents, you see, public documents and investigating documents, and you see land, property, etc. So that is called discovery. In addition to that, legal suit, there are alternative dispute resolution outside the court procedures too. One is a simple mediation. in which generally retired judge or any other appropriate jury or independent attorney or special master will listen to evidence in an informal atmosphere and will attempt to settle the case through compromise, you see, so that both the parties agree. So that is a simple case. It saves time and money. Second is the arbitration. As per contract also, if there is a contract document also of the project, then arbitration procedure is mentioned there too. So in arbitration, a forensic engineer will give testimony under oath to an arbitrator or arbitration panel that will decide the case. So it is less expensive than jury in the court and the jury trial, and it saves time. So there are the alternative procedures. Then further in the legal process are the protocols during the trial. So it is documented, you see, uh, and in our country as well as in other countries, that in the legal proceedings, uh, one has to keep these things in mind. Present a positive attitude and proper demeanor as a forensic engineer. Present a positive attitude, right? Show proper respect to the court. And I've seen this documented and written that address the judge as your honor. So that is the way. Do not be boastful or over exaggerate the professional qualification. They would be meaningless. Remain calm, uh, posed, and you see it in a comfortable way, so that your body language speaks of your, you see, your patience. Sitting up straight in the witness stand and avoiding excessive hand or head gestures. So I think these are taken to be the good, I mean, skills while handling the case in the court of law as, as an engineer to look directly at the jury when answering questions. Don't look at the ceiling or at the floor. That is said to be a better way to have eye-to-eye contact. And don't give any facial expression that convey your feelings. Speak concisely to the point, reply to the question which is answered. Don't tell long stories. Don't give pauses when you talk because it gives opportunity to the other attorneys to start. Maintain composure during verbal attacks. You see, remain calm, peaceful. Confrontation should be avoided with the opposing attorneys in the court because that means damages the expert's credibility could be lost, right? So, any questions on my this lecture till now? Anybody? Yes, for trainings, Mr. Farhan. Is there some question by someone?
Not yet, sir. I don't
Not
see
yet.
it.
Okay.
There's a 8 seconds, sir. Uh,
Okay.
Raised a hand.
Uh, I I feel that people, the participants, are finding it interesting. It is slightly different from the main routine lecture in which people talk. But I also talk theta, beta, and you see engineering figures and diagrams and formulae and the technical jargon all the time. But this is somehow also that we confront now and come across now in our work. So we believe me, I tell you that we must develop some understanding of this area too. Assignment and investigation, there are two important things. The assignment which has to be accepted or which is being worked upon. So a list of preliminary information would be needed.
Sir, we've received a question.
Yeah, please.
Uh, Someone has asked, so basically, how much LLB degree is important for engineers?
Well, it is not that important. It is your passion if you want to do LLB because even forensic engineering doesn't mean that you become a lawyer, you see. Forensic engineer is not a lawyer. That is entirely different education. But if you want to practice in law also properly and deeply into the contractual matters, that may help you further. Generally, engineers don't need a law degree, but if it is your passion, you can do it. It is the experience which teaches us, you see, a lot. about handling these matters, you see, doing these works repeatedly. Because law is itself a very different speciality, and unless it is practiced properly, one cannot become a good lawyer. An engineer will not have the opportunity to practice in law after having obtained the degree, so he'll remain half baked. But so far as information is concerned, yeah, he'll be having knowledge and information of so many things. So that is why you come across very few engineers who are holding a law degree too. Very few. So a preliminary information that should be obtained in such works is number one, what is the type of the project? Important to know type of the project. Nature of damage. What is the nature or damage of deterioration? This is when you are to be engaged or your organization has to be engaged to act as a forensic engineer for a certain project, right? So in which you are not directly involved. So when you have to accept an assignment, means as a project. Yeah, I can see there are a couple of questions
Yes,
again.
there's another question, sir. Can forensic audit become a criminal act, or it's always a civil wrong?
Well, it is generally handled by civil suit. Well, now look at this. Just a minute. Age of the problem. While accepting the project or the assignment, we have to see that how old it is. The damage is the recent and the old one. Most important is what is the scope assigned by the client for such work. What do they want? Do they want only investigation into failure? Do they want also uh, some, indication about that who is responsible to fix the responsibility to, and do they want that repair methodology and mitigation works too? So they're all usually a part of that, and to how much extent do they need the work to be done? Because the level of involvement will be translated by forensic engineer into money, of course. The more involvement, more increased scope of work, more money and more time. But one thing is important that while doing this work, there should not be any conflict of interest. Don't work for a project if there is a conflict of interest. It could include the parties involved in the project as well as any work that you have performed on the project during its construction or past repair or rehabilitation. Even that would be regarded as kind of conflict of interest. So, having known about the project or the assignment, accepting it. So, look at this checklist. Be certain there are no conflicts of interest with any of the parties connected with the last rule, directly or indirectly. Obtain as much background information on the disaster or failure as possible because that will lead to the correct solution and to the correct conclusions. Attempt to separate facts from opinion. There is a difference between the facts and between the opinion. Opinion may be any hearsay, any person saying something without concrete evidence, just on the basis of what he has heard some other person saying. So that or some opinion which is not founded on correct, right foundations. So facts are different. Fact is strong and opinion is not strong. So inquire as to the status of the case, that what is the status and its tentative schedule to determine whether there is sufficient time so that you can accept the work or not. If you feel that this task has to be done in 4 months, and if your client who wants to give you that kind of task and to say that you do in 1 month, of course, it should not be done because then many important things will be left behind and that will ignore so many things. You will have to avoid so many collection of evidences and carrying out some analysis, and the conclusions may be wrong. It means a very serious thing that wrong conclusion may be made, and you see everything which is presented in the court of law may be incorrect.
Sir, we've
So
received a
you make
question.
certain. Hello.
We've received a question.
Yeah.
Uh,
Please.
how
Can
PEC?
you speak a bit loud?
Yes, sir.
Hello.
How PEC, Pakistan Engineering Council, can play a role in forensic engineering? Inquiry tribunal should be constituted by PEC.
Yeah, you see PEC. You see not only PEC. Yeah, of course, but the very contract document of important projects you might have seen that they indicate that what is the procedure for arbitration in case of conflict. And of course, PEC can, of course, and sometimes in addition to PEC, even courts can establish, you see, they can order and they can, you see, order the formation of such juries with the specific persons. So that will also be undisputed. That will have to be accepted. You see, one thing is there. The purpose of this juries or courts is just to establish that what is the extent of issue or damage, who is responsible for this, and what should be the penalty imposed. So that is the real thing which has to be decided, you see, in forensic matters, that what is the right extent of damage, what it is in cost terms, what kind of magnitude of penalty, and who are responsible for this, who should be penalized. So make certain the subject matter is within the appropriate areas of your expertise or of your organization. Of course, fee, there is no shame, you see, in discussing the fees and settling the money matters, and check out the reputation of the attorney or law firm if it is not clearly known. If you are working for a law firm, so that was one part, that accepting the assignment of the forensic investigation or uh, accepting such a project which involves forensic engineering. What kind of investigations may be planned? First step would be to make a plan, to chalk out a plan that this is to be done. And for the investigation of a minor problem, minimum work plan should be there. For a large scale problem, the investigation should be exhaustive. So we have to keep in mind the magnitude of the actual work vis-a-vis the planned investigation work. So we have to look into these things, the budget and scheduling considerations, selection of an interdisciplinary team which will be able to investigate properly with proper coherence, what kind of site observation and testing requirement they should be laid down, what kind of document collection from other departments would be required to help in the matter to conclude, the analysis of data of every type, of site inspection reports, of site testing reports, of laboratory testing reports, of evaluation analysis reports, etc., and development of failure hypothesis jointly on the basis of all this qualitative as well as quantitative information. So that becomes a humongous task, and it is the project dependent too. It depends on the type of the project too. Whether it's a building, it's a bridge, it is a factory, it is a machine, it is some tunnel, it's a pipeline or what. So these things will depend on the type of the work. I'm just discussing very broad guidelines. I see there's another question. Hello. No
Yes,
question.
sir. Uh,
Yeah.
sir, do all the rules apply to all these rules apply to international contractor participating locally?
Yeah. They will apply as per the conditions of contract for that contract in which the international people they are applying, they are bound by a certain contract. So it is mentioned in the contract that what are their liabilities in case of damages. So they have, in case damages are there because of design deficiency, because of the construction deficiency, so they are liable to the extent. But what is the liability limit and whether they are actually liable or not has to be decided in the court or by arbitration. Yeah, another question?
That's it, sir. That's it.
Okay. So it's just a flow diagram, just what I have told you, that there's a client and who would hire an attorney, and then you see there's forensic engineer and some site observations and testing and investigations, and you see ultimately on the basis of all this jargon with some analysis, some conclusions are arrived at, so then they're taken in the uh, court of law for settlement after the litigation in the court. So at the site of failure work, some site investigations which may be needed, maybe some initial site visit, that is very important, first inspection, followed by maybe some non-destructive testing like geophysical, acoustic, thermal, or ultrasonic or magnetic methods, both for ground and for the structure. Some destructive methods in which in the ground boreholes may be made, or if the structure is there, foundation or the superstructure, some coring may be, or some testing may be carried out. Uh, if the ground is to be tested, if there is a suspicion about the weakness of the grounds, and many types of in situ tests for the ground. If the structure's weakness is suspected, so many tests are there. In addition to the tests on the core, one can even subject the selected part of the structure to a full-scale loading test to find out the movements, the strains. So similarly, laboratory tests on soil, water samples, or the foundation samples, or the superstructure samples. So you see, it is an extensive exercise. So here you see kinds of different documents which are needed, ranging from many documents which are in the designs, were used in the design stage, those which were used in the construction stage, those which pertain to monitoring and post-construction stage, and other technical information. So it's a lot of work, and here I think, you are able to draw a line that the task of a forensic engineer who has to investigate the failure cases and to form up his conclusions, which could be presented in a court of law, are quite different from the tasks of a simple design engineer, who, on the basis of some information and data, will be finishing up his work, you see, and issuing the drawings for construction. Here you see the report, which is to be prepared finally as an interface of all of these activities to be presented at any forum, any law forum. So it should show the findings of the forensic investigations and should be written in a clear manner, containing different sections. The purpose of studies and investigations, scope, it should mention findings from the document search, from the documents which have been available already, summary of the actual site investigation work done and the damages seen, and we see report on that, and including further testing at site and in the laboratory, followed by engineering analysis. This analysis may be full-fledged analysis, may require aid of some computer softwares too, and then on the basis of the results of those analysis and other observations and everything, conclusion with a discussion of the cause of failure. And this type of document will be a very rich document, a very good lesson for other engineers to learn from. And if required, some repair recommendations if they are included in the scope of work. Appendices may include references, you see, in detail of all the work which has been done. So here I will give some forensic, geotechnical and foundation investigation, some little commentary on that. That in structures in particular, settlement is one big issue which gives rise to, you see, cracking, settlement, sagging, and loss of performance to some extent. So the settlement could be normally vertical settlement as we normally understand it, or it could be a lateral movement. Lateral movement is more prominent when we construct the buildings on slopes. So any building which is constructed on slope and has undergone some damage or distress may have some lateral movement too, in addition to the vertical movement. So this settlement, its value, its reasons, it is important to know that if it causes failure, you see, it will be considered to have caused failure if it is exceeds than the value which was fixed in the design. For instance, a structure is designed to undergo a settlement of 50 millimeter at the foundation level. But in reality, if the settlements are something like 70 or 80 millimeter, so in a way, it is also a kind of failure that the expected or design value has been exceeded because of any reason. Now we have to see that why it is so. Is it engineers' negligence? Is it the construction team's negligence, or whether it is an act of nature or what has happened? Only on the basis of assessment of that, the liability would be fixed. So there are common causes of settlement. We know the clays settle by the process called consolidation, and see other materials which are non-cohesive like sand and gravels. You see, they will have a short-term settlement. They will tend to settle quickly. Similarly, rocks do settle less, but if they have problem, if they have cavities or caverns, big holes, then they may collapse all of a sudden. And that kind of settlement could be very detrimental. It may damage the whole structure sitting over it, or may cause severe, distress to the structure sitting over it. Foundation can also experience settlement due to natural reasons because of earthquakes and floods. So here one is to see whether the earthquake or flood considered in the design of that system is according to the code and meeting the requirement, and that earthquake or flood which has caused damage to the structure is beyond the value which is justified on the basis of code. So this will help fix the liability or otherwise, or it will not fix any liability. Sometimes it is such also that codes are revised from time to time. Every 3, 4, 5 years, there are revisions in the codes. We normally follow American or British codes of different types for our design works. So far, that is the practice. So if there is a failure which is 20, which was in a structure which was constructed 20 years before, 20 years ago. So in order to do forensic engineering, we have to look into the soundness of the design and construction practices in the codes which were prevalent 20 years back, not the latest code. So some people commit this mistake also, that they use the latest code to find out the cause of mistake or error, that what went wrong in the old structure. So that should not be done. I think I gave you the message correctly. If backfills are used, nor compacted properly, or backfill itself is a weight, sometimes it is ignored by engineers, and that becomes serious. So that also results or causes settlement. So here in this diagram you see there is a structure with 4 foundations, and if you can see the movement of the arrow as I'm doing it on my screen, this is uh, the base of foundation here, and other foundation which is here. The difference between the settlement of the two is the maximum settlement between any two foundations of this structure, maximum. maximum differential settlement. But here, the difference in settlement between two adjacently loaded load points, two adjacently loaded columns is small delta. So it is less than that. So there are two kinds of differential settlements in this structure. One is the maximum between any two foundations, and the other is the maximum between the adjacently loaded areas. Both have their own significances, and in codes, you see there are limits assigned for both. So many years back, I think around 1950s and 60s, Skempton and MacDonald, they studied about 100 buildings, and they found out that 40 had been damaged in various degrees, and about the remaining, about 60 or so, they have no significant damage from the consequence of the settlements. So, on the basis of this enormous study, they concluded that cracking of brick panels in frame buildings or load-bearing brick walls is likely to occur if the angular distortion of the foundation exceeds 1 over 300. What is the angular distortion here? Here, if I say the distance between the two adjacent loaded points is L, and the difference in the settlement of the two adjacent loaded points is delta, the delta over L. This differential settlement divided by the distance between them is called the angular distortion, delta over L. So when this value, delta over L, exceeds 1 over 300, so that is an indication of structural distress or structural damage. So it is simple, you see, by a forensic method to establish that what is the extent of settlement of the two adjacent loaded points, so that one can see whether they are within the limits of code or not. And structural damage to columns and beams is likely to occur if angular distortion of the foundation exceeds 1 over 500. You see, so there are these two limits, and you see such values of total and differential movements are given here. You see, you can find out these are very, let's not go into this kind of discussion into detail. I will just like to show you a few uh, figures to see which give kind of settlement in the field. That could be very, very serious settlement you see in the field. And here you can see in this kind of structure that a part of the structure is made on fill, this part, and the part is on the natural ground. So that was a mistake. And if fill was used, it was not properly compacted. So there has been a case of more settlement here. You see the floor, the natural ground is here, and here it has gone down. So the forensic engineer will have to find out that if the fill was used, was it compacted properly? And this difference in level will be a very clear indication of distress in this part of building being pronounced. So forensic engineer may also be asked to determine possible negligence on the part of the design engineer. Of course, this could be in the TOR. So many soil properties, on the other hand, the ground or the construction standard can change with time. It is important for a forensic engineer to apply those standards or assess the soil properties that existed at the time of construction. This is the key. This is one very important point. It nullifies many conflicts. It will remove many hot points. The assessment has to be done in the light of the state-of-the-art methods available at that time, the codes which are available at that time, and the ground condition which was present at that time. That becomes the reference, not the present. So there are many kinds of ground conditions which give problems to structures, and the forensic engineer will have to look into the issues of the soil which expand upon addition of water. And conversely, when the water is removed, they will tend to contract. So this expansive and contractive behavior is attributed to the same type of soil because of the special mineral arrangement and the presence of special minerals in those soils. They're normally clays having expensive minerals in which the water gets into them and then applies pressure with which the particles of the soil get apart. Here you see a structure, and here you see that this is the active zone in which expansion could take place. Active zone is generally the one in which the moisture movements take place, in which the moisture could reduce or moisture could increase. That is the active zone. Below the active zone is the inactive zone, in which there is no significant moisture movement. So here, water from the top can get in, and here you see what will happen. There will be desiccation or sun drying effect too. So here, when we make a structure on such a ground, it kind of seals the ground so that higher moisture remains under it, which gradually causes slight swelling or upheaval of the structure too. And look at the example of a tree present in the vicinity of such structure. Tree through roots is a moisture sucker, so it will reduce moisture in this zone. So what do we expect here? We expect contraction here and expansion here, and a consequent rise. Hawking kind of pattern here in the building in this way, and what we expect is cracking of some type, center lift of a house in this kind of expensive soil system. So let's not go too much into its detail. I just skip this. Well, so the swelling soil may look like this, and the forensic engineer may have a look at this. That if it is having the shape of an alligator or a crocodile skin, that gives a very clear indication that this site has a problem. Now let's talk a little about the lateral movements. That many structures in engineering which develop cracking and movement, they undergo lateral movement in addition to the vertical movement. And there could be a variety of causes. It could be seepages, uh, lack of restraint at the back, or the pressure exerted by the backfill behind the retaining walls on the other side, and on the other side there is lack of restraint. So that causes lateral movement or the structures which are present on slope. And if there is some slope movement, maybe a slow movement or relatively fast movement, so that is always going to result into some lateral movement too. So that is a condition which requires a proper study with a keen eye, that not only the vertical movement in a conventional way is there, but also there is a lateral movement, and there is an issue of slope instability or kind of landsliding maybe. Because generally when we say slope instability, we generally refer to a smaller area of the slope, and when we call of landslide, in our mind is a bigger area, a bigger part of the whole slope. So that makes it a landslide. I see that there are a few questions. Yeah, Mr. Farhan.
No,
Yeah.
sir. There are not no
No.
questions. I just shared the evaluation sheet. That's it.
Okay. Okay. So here you see a retaining wall pushed from the back under water pressure. You can see sphere cracking here. So such type of movements are a common case. So expansive soils have a tendency to uplift the light structures like pavements, causing upheaval, and kind of a cracking pattern. Let's not show this. So besides the construction of this special foundation which will be able to resist expansive soil, some other treatments a forensic engineer, if required to recommend the repair methodology in such soil, will be able to give some treatments. And there are a host of treatment methods for such soil. One is that in the active zone, just remove the active zone of the soil and replace it with non-swelling soil, and remold and recompact it, or to put surcharge load to increase the height, increase the elevation of the ground, and to cause the swelling soil to get wet before construction. That is called pre-wetting. So that the major part of expansion that is expected will take place because of the pre-wetting before start of construction. So this is a simple and a reasonable technique adopted in many situations. Or in some other cases, one can treat with lime or cement or salt or fly ash by excavating the soil, swelling soil, and then mixing with these in small percentages like 5, 6, 7%. Fly ash may be required 10, 15%, and then recompacting it. So its swelling attitude would be contained, you see, to a large degree. So similarly, there are organic compounds and there are barriers, and you see things like this and that, which can control the movements in such soil. So another kind of situation which a forensic engineer will come across of lateral movements is that movements on the slopes. Slope movement could be of several types. There are falls, rock falls, in which the uh, pieces of the disintegrated rock fall under gravity straight, and the other in which they kind of turn and topple and then fall under gravity. And uh, there is a kind of a superficial slope failure, a shallow failure in which only the upper mass is involved, and which is generally taken care of by growing vegetation to control the superficial failure. But if a slope is subject to deep failure, gross slope failure, which is a deep failure, so the plant or vegetation doesn't work there. So this is also has to be seen, you see, in those situations of forensic engineering. And landslide is a big movement, gross failure of not only one slope, could be a system of many slopes, you see, big area, like we observe landslides mainly on Karakoram Highway in Pakistan. So slides have been of other types when there is high moisture present in the soil. So they kind of flow. They called normally debris flow, and the rate of movement is not that low. If the rate of movement is low and gradual, then that kind of movement in slope is creep. So this kind of effect is minimal on the structures, and a forensic engineer has to find out the right reasons for the movement, whether they were considered by the engineer at design stage and some measures were taken or not taken. So that fixes a very big responsibility. Uh, so there has been guideline on the allowable lateral movements of the structures too, and there is a relationship between the angular distortion I defined earlier, delta over L, and the horizontal movement, horizontal strain. And on this plot, one can see that it can be, you see, uh, it can fall at any point to indicate the degree of sphericity, whether it is negligible or slight or sphere to very sphere from building damages point of view. So this relationship has been constructed by American Society of Civil Engineers for lateral movement to have a check that whether this is going to be very sphere. So forensic engineer can just put it and just have a look at it. So there are other forces in addition to these which affect the structures, like earthquakes is very common thing, and the right way of doing earth design for earthquake engineering is to use either for ordinary works, the building code, and for special works, the special geological methods to arrive at the peak ground acceleration by actual fault study. And if even then, if there are movements and damages in the structure in an earthquake area, then one has to see as a forensic engineer that whether those earthquakes exceeded the ones given in the code and whether the procedure given in the code was adhered to, and even then this damage has taken place. So that would clearly result into modification in the code, you see. So that will not tantamount to fixing some liability on the parties or on the engineers who were involved in the design or in the construction stage. So similarly, there are movements of the embankment dams also, you see, and there are other issues of the ground, you see, which have a relationship with the earthquakes. So it has to be seen by the forensic engineer. It becomes a complex thing, whether surface faulting was there, whether the ground got liquefied and lost its strength during the earthquake and the building tilted and collapsed. What slope, what kind of movements were there in the slope. Maybe he requires to put some instrumentation to regard movement on the slope, as we have been doing in Murray quite often. Because in Murray there is a tendency to build structures and facilities on the slope. Of course, where else they can do. Some of the areas are stable, others are not. The stable areas have already been used for construction in areas like Murray, and the areas which are less stable are now going to be used or are being used for construction. So quite often there are problems of movement, vertical and lateral movements are there. But there are ways and means also to arrest them at the design stage too. Good design would arrest them at the design stage. Are there some queries or questions at this stage?
Yes, sir. There's one question. What
Yeah.
about silty A4 soil? How it behaves for soil replacement or backfilling?
Silty A4 soil is generally not a better option, you see, for backfilling. Of course, we can use it, you see, in a controlled condition, but for placing structures, if we have better soil which is non-cohesive, it will have less settlement potential than silty soil. But for embankment dams, you see, where we require soil in bulk, and we have not to, make big structures on the dam itself. So embankment dams are typically made of, you see, where silty soils are available, silts are used, or if battery materials are used, shells are made of the battery material and cores are made of silty soil. So always keep in mind the silty soils in engineering will be inferior to the granular soils in general, right? In earthquake areas, if the granular soils are present in loose state and with high groundwater table, then they will cause very serious issue of liquefaction. So, in earthquake areas, the structures which are built on granular soils, such granular soil should be present in a high state of compaction uh, to remain safe during the earthquakes. So here I will quote a very famous example of Hyatt Regency walkway collapse in Kansas City, USA. The lessons learned are important for us and for forensic engineers to see. They uh, arrived at three main conclusions. Luth has reported three main lessons. Number one, implications of failures, though rare, are far too serious for scope to be defined through low bid process. So, so here one important thing has been pointed out in this case of failure, which could be the case of failure of many other civil engineering and other works too, that the construction, the design, after design, the construction is based and the contractor is hired on the basis of the lowest bid. So he has clearly negated the requirement of low bid for good quality work because the low cost bid will tend to save money, and the saved money sometimes goes into using unscrupulous practice in the construction. So that's why you see for good projects there is more emphasis now which is paid to the quality, and some good works are just on the basis of quality, you see. First of all, one has to see that whether the parties who are going to construct they meet the quality requirement or not. They should all meet the quality requirement. Then one should select the bidder with the lowest cost. So similarly, another conclusion which is given by Luth from that failure, which is also applicable generally, that civic authorities cannot adequately check and approve the design of the major projects. A peer review is a must. Our civil bodies, like here in Lahore, you see there is LDA or Capital Development Authority, CD in Islamabad. If design of some important project is submitted to them for approval, they don't have system generally to review it properly. They will just see the main thing and put a stamp that it's okay. But the experience tells that such projects which are just approved by civic bodies, they fail. They quite abundantly fail or they quite abundantly develop problem. So this means that important projects they need to be reviewed by a panel of experts. A peer review is a must. See, so the peer review must be assigned by the civic body. So this is another conclusion given by them. So this requires, of course, a lot of reforming in the engineering business. Third conclusion is that in such cases, when there is an involvement of the legal profession also in the forensic matters to settle the case, to fix the liability, to find out the reasons, and to find out that what happened actually, engineers cannot allow the legal profession, the lawyers and the judges to define the duties of the engineers, their specifications, etc., which constitute good engineering practice. This is the engineer's task. In reality, in such cases, sometimes the legal profession exceeds their limit and they tend to dictate the engineers that look, your duties were to be these and you did it wrongly, and you were to work in shifts like these, and your work specifications are incorrect. You must improve. The profession of law has nothing to do with that. So this is what they learned from the case of failure of height regency walkway. You can Google and you can find out. This is a very interesting case of failure. I just mentioned these three in conclusion because they relate to us also and to relate the whole profession of engineering. That some reforms are really needed in the matters of engineering. So this is a collapse of a chimney case. Here I would just like to, through this slide, would like to emphasize that in the matter of forensic engineering, things go into the investigative detail, and I tend to draw a line between a stable soil over which the buildings stand perfectly and an unstable or liquefied soil. So here you see a magnified view of soil present here is shown in this circle in which the soil particles are shown. They are packed and they have grain to grain contact too, but they are rather loosely packed because a lot of water is here. During earthquake, when earthquake comes and there are repeated cycles of loading and unloading, the particles of soil physically get separated. Here it was on the left side, grain to grain contact is there. There is no physical separation because for active load transference of the structure into the ground, grain to grain contact is necessary. During shaking, because of the buildup of pressure in the water called pore water pressure, the particles get physically separated. This is liquefaction. So this is a momentary situation, may last for a few seconds only, in which the ground loses its shearing strength, because you can very clearly see with your eyes in this model that it will behave like a liquid or like a gel, no shearing strength. So hence the consequences here: collapse or tilting or toppling of buildings. You see sinking of building here, and this is total collapse. So this is a very important or significant kind of situation which a forensic engineer may come across. Similarly, a lot of settlement, vertical settlement you see because of the rupture in the ground, and you see such crackings, etc. Movement of the structures. Erosion is another thing you see, which has to be seen in engineering, in civil engineering in particular. And one has to see that what is the main cause, whether it has been excessive runoff and that is causing erosion close to the structure, or rivers and streams and are causing, you see, a lot of erosion, or it is a coastal erosion or because of some chemicals flowing with the water, chemical erosion, glacial and floods you see with them. Erosion brought about by wind, by carrying of the dislodging of the soil particle by wind, or there has been a mass movement itself. So here you see many types of erosion patterns also in ground, and if structures are there, they're going to be affected. You see river carving a valley is a general case, and waves cutting back cliffs, and you see wind blowing like dune blowing. You see and shifting the sand from one place to the other, and here glacial movement, and you see kind of landslides. Here you can see a lot of material having slipped down. So that kind of movement is also broadly speaking under the realm of the erosion. So I just wanted to give you a very broad outlook of the scope of the forensic engineering and with particular reference to geotechnical and foundation engineering too, but applicable to all disciplines of engineering. Now let's go back to discuss a little about design, what design is about. Design in engineering, whether this is civil, electrical, mechanical, or any other discipline, it may be considered as an attempt to use sciences, mathematics, the latest technology, and other principles, softwares to prevent failures. The ultimate objective is that we use codes, guidelines, mathematical principles, and the failures should not take place. We also use a factor of safety according to the situation. So this works well most of the time. But at other times when it is not successful, it can then provide lessons for students and practitioners. Whether that is a failure because of the negligence of the engineers or by act of nature, even if the sound practices were used, but act of nature has been there beyond the limits specified in the codes, it becomes a lesson for the engineers, for the practitioners, for the students to learn from. So that's why I was emphasizing in my initial part of the lecture that in the advanced world, they have established national centers for investigating engineering failures, whose entire task is, without going into litigation, just for the sake of the technical development, to investigate the failure, find out their causes, not to fix a responsibility, to find their causes and document as case histories for the guidance of the engineers. And mind, please, that even those documents will become a good reference for the forensic engineers, you see, because every case history of failures has a lot of lessons, and it also results into uh, modification and development of the building codes. The building codes are revised on the basis of the failures which are seen, you see, every time. Now, what is a failure? There are different experts in engineering who have been defining failure in their own ways. Going chronologically, back in 64, Feld gave this definition that although structural collapses are rare, if failure is defined as non-conformity with design expectations, then there are many failures. He said that one is a clear-cut case of failure in which you see the collapse or a lot of distress or cracking or movement. In the other cases, if the design expectations are not met, I say I designed the structure to undergo only 25 millimeter settlement. It settled 50 millimeter. So it is the non-conformity with the design expectation. I designed the structure so as not to become dam proof, but it became very damp. The basement became very damp and seepage started. So it was also a failure of my design expectation. So he regards that all the such cases when there is a disparity between the expectations and the actual performance occurrence, so that is also a failure. What do you think? Anybody giving opinion on this? Is it the right analogy? Anybody listening to me, please give opinion. Anyone? Yes, Farhan, is there somebody? sharing his opinion on this?
Not specifically related to this, sir. There's another question.
Yeah, can you speak a bit loud?
Ji, sir. Which
Yeah.
type of documentation is generally required after completing forensic investigation? If report is required to submit before court of law, then who will define the requirement of documents?
Well, as I've given you the details, you see, they are documented, you see, by American Society of Civil Engineers on Forensic Engineering also. Guidelines are available, and also, as I told you, ASTM's Committee E58. They define the contents of the such reports or documents. But in addition, the terms of reference of the assignment, which are settled, you see, which will also define that what should be the content and to what limit of detail. Okay, so there is not a single hard and fast rule that I can tell you that these. But I also gave you some guidelines about the contents of the document or of the report to be submitted to the court of law or to a jury. So in 1982, Leonards, a very famous name, famous engineer, he says an unacceptable difference between expected and observed performance. So this is almost the same thing. Like Feld has pointed out that one is a clear-cut case of failure, other is also failure. So for a forensic engineer, you see, one has to look with an open eye. We have to, as a forensic engineer, we have to look that this was the expected behavior and this is the observed or actual performance. If there's a mismatch, if the performance is bad, it is poorer than what we designed for, then it is a failure, even if the structure is standing. In 2009, quite recently, Norbert defines this in two parts. He gives his version in this way that you figure out all that can possibly go wrong. List out, find out that this bad can happen, this can happen, this can happen. Before designing a structure in Lahore, can engineers think that the structure could be subjected to flood and high tides? Anybody to give opinion? Anybody to please? यार कोई बोलें बताएं अपनी ओपिनियन बताएं मेरा ख्याल है इसमें बड़े लर्नर समझदार इंजीनियर बैठे होंगे I would like to listen from you that is it logically true to design for every kind of eventuality for designing a building in Lahore I'm asking or for designing a bridge in Lahore should a flooded condition be assumed also because that is something which can go wrong what does engineering teach us in such kind of situations yes please Farhan anybody no
Anyone who wants to interact, please, they can use the raise hand option.
ऊंचा बोले
The participants can use the raise hand option if they want to talk.
ओके ओके तो मैं ज़रा वो फिजिकल लेक्चर देने वाली मुझे आदत है ना आई जस्ट poke some questions you see put some questions to the participants also so that their interest remains alive anyway as per Norbert in 2009 he says that find out what can go wrong ये डिज़ाइन स्टेज पे आपने
Sir, please unmute your mic, please.
my mic was muted oh my mic was muted I don't know how so I was saying that Norbert said in 2009 that you find out figure out that what possibly could go wrong for a project at the design stage and then you make sure that nothing goes wrong nothing wrong happens such should be the measures taken in the design so that's a very good way okay uh, yeah So according to Luth in 2000, he gave a very interesting commentary that why less failures are taking place because besides and despite so many anomalies in engineering, he said that buildings are not automobiles and airplanes. It is not possible to build and test prototypes to work out the bugs. We cannot test full structures in engineering. You see, like a bridge or like you see a tall building or like a dam. They are not like small automobiles or even airplanes. We cannot test. We can just have tests on the materials and on the small parts and then apply the conclusion. Nor is it possible to design and draw every detail on the drawings. We build from less than complete drawings. Normally, this is there. We generally in engineering work, the designs are less than the complete drawing. Always there are certain things which are left. Laborers have uncertain skills in addition. They are human beings. And the term which we call workmanship, that is there. When there is a medium order or low workmanship, of course the quality suffers by the same laborers. So such a system in which we make our structures in civil engineering in particular is apt to produce more failure. So it should have produced more failures, but it is not producing more failures. So Lutz here comments that fact that there are so few failures is a credit to the professionalism of both the construction and design professionals. So it is made to make all of you happy, but I'm not happy. I don't agree too much with Mr. Luth because this case of less failures is because of the use of a high safety factor more often than less. Do you agree? It is the use of safety factor which saves us, you see. In particular in civil engineering, we use fairly good, and in NESPAC, I also know my colleagues from NESPAC who are listening to me, they know that they use good safety factors, and Mr. Luth has given them credit that they are doing very good work. So, broad type of failures. Look here, failure of people and companies, failure in planning, which is one thing very important. If your planning fails, everything fails. Financial failures and like bankruptcy. What kind of work you will be able to do if you have lost money? Personal failure like crime and corruption and loss of morality. We are human beings. Engineers are also human beings. Failures due to natural disasters. The actual structural failures and system failures like hotel fire safety assignment failures, etc., etc. So these are the failures which have to be considered in forensic engineering. Failures and mistakes, what are these? Are these inexperience? Look here, we learn and gain experience by making mistakes, don't we? We do. We gain experience. I, as a junior engineer, made more mistakes. Now I make less mistakes in those kind of works which I do now. Once we become experienced, we are less likely to commit the similar mistakes in the similar kind of work assignments. So, mistake, however, continue to be made by those who are in the process of gaining experience. So, no sane engineer can say that he never made any mistake. We make mistakes, we are human beings. That is how we are developing, and that is how engineering develops. We may again commit mistakes when confronted with something new in which we lack experience. So, in a way, there is a positive side of failures and mistakes that improves our experience. We gain from these failures with time. I think I've already commented on the lateral movements, foundation problems. Well, I think we have discussed to some extent. We should not overemphasize on this. In addition, there are problems of durability in addition to the straightforward failure, which come from the sulfate and chloride systems in foundations in civil engineering, deterioration of pavements because of the frost action in which heaving is there, alkali silica and aggregate reaction, the material type is inappropriate, the dampness is there, because of the moisture movement which could not be controlled. Plantation of too many trees around the structure will draw water from the ground, resulting into contraction and some kind of settlements, particularly in the swelling soils. There are bearing capacity failures of buildings, and there are pumping of clays in the rigid pavements, and the old structures have their own reasons. The archaeological, historical structures that are unusual structured, and there are so many effects of the groundwater movement. It's not only groundwater rise, you see, which can mar the structure and its foundation, but also the capillary rise, which is a gradual phenomenon. And when I was a student in MSc engineering, one of my professors, he once commented that you as civil engineers should know that which is your enemy number one in your professional life. So we just thought of so many things because when we think of enemy as human beings, we had a perception of enemy in the form of human beings. So he ultimately remarked that water is the number one enemy for the civil engineering works. And then he quoted that when he was a student, then his professor at some American university, he gave me an assignment that you go and just write down all the defects and problems that can take up, that can crop up in your civil engineering works of different types because of water, because of any reason. And he then told me that he basically compiled a long list. So water does a lot of harm to civil engineering works. Less water, uh, with an apology to our water engineers. I don't know if some water engineers are attending here or not, but I'm talking of the harm being done to the civil structures, to the structure by water. And in forensic engineering, the role of water has to be clearly understood properly. In landsliding issue, water is the culprit number one. In our northern part, in Murray, Kohala, and even in northern areas along Karakoram Highway, and you see other areas, in most of the cases, the culprit number one is water, the drainage of water, poor surface drainage and poor subsurface drainage. So repairing is, you see, another task which could be assigned in and repairing of groundworks and earthworks and foundations, you see, reducing potential liability. You see, let's have a little discussion. Proper report preparation and file management. Files are managed properly and a proper report is prepared. You see, reports are prepared and proper documents are prepared. You see, things are in order. Then possibility of such liabilities will reduce. And there is a lot of engineering jargon, paperwork, and other things and technical words. So they should be avoided. And there are strategies to avoid the civil liability. If the risks are assessed, insurance is carried out of the works, and there are clauses in the conditions of contract about the limitation, about the maximum value of the liability clauses. So contracts have to be made very properly and very carefully. So
So
Metcon said back
we
in,
have a question.
hello, yeah, please.
What weightage should be given to engineering judgment if some calculations in design softwares are not providing unusual results? How can we defend the mistake made by us due to low or non-experience legally?
Well, if we have less experience and some mistake is made on the basis of less experience, then in legal term, you see, they they just compare it with the best work done by normal or expert engineer. That is what is called standard of care. That a standard of care has not been exercised in the work, and less experienced engineer, like a tall building, a difficult complex structure, has been designed by novice engineers, say grade 8 people who have less experience. then very much likely they are going to make some maybe mistakes or some oversights could be there. So if there is some failure, code will not accept this, that this is because of the less knowledge and less experience. They will say that standard, this is the standard of care which should have been exercised. So there is a negligence in that, and penalty will be fixed. So the second part is the engineering judgment. That is entirely different. You see, work of sensitive works, important works by inexperienced engineers is one thing. Judgment is something which is prerogative of very experienced engineers. And judgment must be exercised in engineering. Our codes allow that. Judgment is not a tool to be used by less experienced people. That will lead to catastrophes otherwise. I think you got my message. Are you clear about this now? The person who questioned? Okay. Metcon in 1984. Interesting. He says that the future is very bright. There are many law graduates which are coming up, and people are now understanding, you see, more about the litigation, and engineers are also learning law. And somebody asked me that how good it will be for an engineer to have a law degree. Yes, very good. So such engineers will also be coming up, and people will be more aware, and governments will be implementing the regulations of health, safety, environment. Like NESPAC also has made now health, safety, environment manual under our R&D program. That is very voluminous. So such things make things complicated, and the matter of task of the forensic engineer also becomes complex. So ultimately, in a nutshell, with this situation, there will be this profession established. You will see those who live will see that this will be a good profession coming up. Forensic engineering